Hi, my name is Jake, and this is the story of how my wife betrayed me during one of the hardest times of my life. When I discovered her betrayal, she tried to destroy me further, filing for divorce and suing for half of everything I owned. But I didn't crumble. Instead, I vowed to dismantle her plans and ensure she'd regret ever crossing me. It started during a rough chapter of my life. My father had been diagnosed with a terminal illness, and I was doing everything I could to support him. Between hospital visits and managing his care, I was stretched thin. My wife, Emily, seemed supportive at first, encouraging me to spend time with Dad and handle the situation as best I could. But something changed. At first, it was subtle. Emily started being distant. She'd stay out late, claiming she was out with friends. I brushed it off, thinking she needed her own time to decompress. But then she became glued to her phone, guarding it like a hawk. She'd smile at texts, but would instantly lock her screen if I walked into the room. The gut feeling that something was wrong started gnawing at me. The tipping point came one Saturday night when I returned home earlier than expected from visiting Dad. Emily wasn't home, and her phone was on the kitchen counter. I knew it was wrong, but curiosity and suspicion won out. I checked it. What I saw shattered me. A string of messages between her and someone named Tyler confirmed my worst fears. They were explicit, filled with plans for secret meetups, and sprinkled with complaints about me. According to Emily, I was too focused on my dad and didn't make her feel special anymore. Reading those words felt like a knife to the chest. I realized she wasn't just cheating on me. She was trying to justify it by making me out to be the bad guy. I wanted to confront her immediately, but I stopped myself. My instincts told me to gather more information before making any moves. If Emily was willing to betray me during a time like this, who knew what else she was capable of? So, I decided to dig deeper into her lies. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up, replaying the past few months in my head, piecing together every odd behavior, every excuse, and every missed sign. I promised myself one thing. I wouldn't let her walk away unscathed. This wasn't just a betrayal of me. It was a betrayal of the life we'd built together. The next day, Emily acted as if nothing had happened. She hummed in the kitchen while making breakfast, smiling at me like we were the perfect couple. It made me sick, but I forced myself to play along. I knew I couldn't confront her until I had more proof, something solid that she couldn't worm her way out of. I decided to dig into her activities more carefully. That afternoon, while she went for her yoga class, I combed through her emails and social media. What I found was illuminating, to say the least. A series of emails to Tyler revealed just how deep their connection went. He wasn't just some random fling. They were making plans, big plans, moving in together, vacationing in Cabo, selling my house. Yes, my house. Emily had been subtly discussing putting it on the market, framing it as something we'd do together to downsize. Turns out, she was planning to take the proceeds and start a new life with Tyler. The audacity of it was mind-blowing. She hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She was laying the groundwork to strip me of everything I'd worked for. What's worse, Tyler wasn't some stranger. I recognized his name and face from her old college photos. He was a former boyfriend of hers, someone I'd met at a reunion years ago. Back then, he was a smug, arrogant type who clearly thought he was God's gift to the world. I never liked him, but Emily had assured me they were just friends. Little did I know, I'd been inviting her lover into our life under the guise of nostalgia. I started documenting everything, emails, screenshots, even her whereabouts when she said she was at yoga or dinner with friends. It was hard, gut-wrenching, to dig deeper into her betrayal, but I needed every piece of evidence. If she wanted to ruin me, I was going to make sure she paid for every single lie. Things escalated when I stumbled upon a shared Dropbox folder between her and Tyler. Inside were photos of the two of them, at bars, at parks, and even in what I could only assume was his apartment. But what truly made my blood boil were the comments. They were mocking me. Tyler had written something like, "He's so clueless, isn't he? Too busy playing nurse to his dad to see what's right in front of him." Emily's reply, "I know, right? I almost feel bad, but not really. He just doesn't have it in him to make me happy anymore." That was the moment I decided I wasn't just going to protect myself. I was going to make sure she regretted ever betraying me. But first, I had to confront the person I trusted most after her, my lawyer. His name was Ben, an old friend from college. I laid everything out for him, my suspicions, the evidence, and my plan to expose Emily for what she was. Ben listened carefully, nodding as I spoke. "Jake," he said, leaning forward, "you've got a case. But you need to be smart about this. Don't confront her yet. We'll gather everything we need to ensure she can't take anything from you when this blows up." Together, we came up with a strategy to safeguard my assets and prepare for the storm I was about to unleash. But even as I plotted my next move, Emily's behavior became bolder. She started coming home late without even bothering to make excuses. Some nights, she didn't come home at all. One night, after another one of her mysterious absences, I couldn't help myself. "Busy yoga session?" I asked as she walked through the door. She froze for a split second, then recovered, flashing me that fake, sweet smile that made my skin crawl. "Yeah," she said lightly, brushing past me. "Class ran late, and then I grabbed drinks with a couple of the girls." I nodded, pretending to believe her. "You should have called. I was worried." She barely looked at me as she muttered sorry and disappeared into the bedroom. The gall of her lies was infuriating, but it only fueled my resolve. In the coming weeks, I dug deeper and found out something even more shocking. Emily wasn't just planning to leave me. She was planning to sue me for spousal support, claiming that I had emotionally abandoned her during my father's illness. Tyler had apparently been coaching her on how to frame her case, telling her to document evidence of my neglect. The sheer audacity made me laugh out loud. Here she was playing the victim while she was the one sneaking around. By now, I had all the evidence I needed. With Ben's help, I froze our joint accounts and transferred my personal savings to a protected account. I also set up alerts for any financial activity on our credit cards, just in case. Emily thought she was pulling the strings, but she had no idea I was already 3 steps ahead. Next up was the confrontation. It wasn't just going to be emotional, it was going to be tactical. But I wasn't going to do it alone. I had a plan to ensure Emily and her little scheme would be exposed for everyone to see. The night of the confrontation was one I had been planning meticulously for weeks. Every detail had to be perfect. I wanted to confront Emily with undeniable evidence, make it impossible for her to twist the narrative. I also wanted Tyler's smug face out of my life for good. But most importantly, I wanted to ensure she couldn't destroy me legally or financially. Emily came home late again, her behavior predictable at this point. I was waiting for her in the living room, laptop open, a stack of documents on the coffee table. When she walked in and saw me sitting there, her expression faltered just slightly. She knew something was off. "Jake, why are you sitting in the dark?" she asked, her tone overly casual as she dropped her purse on the counter. I leaned back, keeping my voice steady. "We need to talk." Her brows furrowed, and she hesitated before walking into the room. "About what?" she asked, sitting on the far edge of the couch like the distance would shield her. I pulled up my laptop screen and rotated it toward her. On it was a slideshow of screenshots, texts, emails, and photos of her and Tyler. The moment her eyes landed on the screen, her face drained of color. "About this," I said. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, as if a switch had flipped, she let out a sharp laugh. "You've been spying on me?" she said, her voice full of feigned indignation. "That's pathetic, Jake. I didn't rise to the bait. Don't try to turn this around on me, Emily. I know everything. Tyler, the plans to sell the house, the lawsuit you're cooking up to claim I neglected you. I have it all." Her mask of outrage cracked, and for the first time, I saw fear flash in her eyes. "It's not what it looks like," she stammered, her voice shaky. I tilted my head, crossing my arms. "Oh, really? So you're not sleeping with Tyler? You're not planning to drain our accounts and leave me for him?" She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. "Save it. I've already frozen the accounts. And don't bother with your little lawsuit. I've got records proving you've been funneling money into your personal accounts for months." Emily's jaw dropped, and for the first time, she seemed genuinely speechless. I wasn't done yet. "Oh, and just so you know, I've forwarded all of this to Tyler's employer. Something tells me his bosses won't be thrilled about his involvement in fraud." You wouldn't," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Try me, I said coldly. You've been playing me for a fool, Emily. But this is over. She broke down then, tears streaming down her face as she begged for forgiveness. I made a mistake, she sobbed, reaching for my hand. I wasn't thinking straight. Tyler manipulated me. I didn't know what I was doing. I pulled my hand away, disgusted. You knew exactly what you were doing. And now, you're going to face the consequences. She cried harder, but I felt nothing. Her tears didn't erase the months of lies, the betrayal, or the plans she made to destroy me. They were nothing more than the byproduct of her getting caught. I'll give you two options, I said, my voice steely. You can leave this house tonight, or we can take this to court, and I'll make sure you leave with nothing. Either way, we're done. For a moment, she just sat there, her sobs subsiding into silence. Finally, she stood up, her expression unreadable. You'll regret this, she said quietly before walking toward the bedroom. Minutes later, I heard her throwing things into a suitcase. As she packed, I forwarded the last piece of evidence to my lawyer, Ben. He had assured me that we had an airtight case, and I trusted him to handle the legal fallout. Emily could try to fight, but she'd already lost. When she finally left the house that night, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I had loved her once, truly loved her, and I had built a life with her that I thought was unshakable. But now, that life was in ruins, and the person I thought I knew was nothing more than a stranger. The fight wasn't over, though. Tyler still needed to be dealt with, and I had one final plan to ensure neither of them would ever forget this chapter of their lives. With Emily gone, I turned my focus to Tyler. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about ensuring he couldn't pull something like this on someone else. Emily's betrayal had been personal, but Tyler's involvement felt calculated, malicious. He hadn't just taken advantage of my wife. He'd tried to sabotage my entire life. The first step was to hit him where it hurt the most, his career. Tyler worked as a mid-level executive at a marketing firm, a position he often bragged about during the few times I'd tolerated his presence. His smug confidence had always grated on me, but now I saw it for what it truly was, arrogance bred by a belief that he could do anything without consequences. I forwarded the emails and texts to his firm's HR department. I didn't bother explaining much. His own words were damning enough. Phrases like he's too stupid to notice and will bleed him dry before he figures it out didn't exactly scream team player. Within hours, I received an auto-reply confirming the company's receipt of the information. I knew it wouldn't take them long to act. The next step was personal. Tyler had a reputation to maintain, a polished, successful man who could charm anyone. But I had evidence that painted a very different picture. I made anonymous accounts on several local social media groups and began posting snippets of his texts and emails. Nothing too explicit, just enough to make people question his integrity. Let's just say his image took a hit faster than I expected. Meanwhile, Emily wasn't doing much better. Word had spread quickly among our mutual friends, many of whom sided with me after hearing about her betrayal. She tried reaching out to me several times, leaving voicemails and sending texts, but I didn't respond. I wasn't interested in apologies or explanations. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. A week later, I received a call from my lawyer, Ben. Jake, he said, his tone triumphant. I have good news. The judge has granted a temporary order, freezing all marital assets. Emily can't touch a penny, and we've got a strong case to ensure she doesn't walk away with more than she's entitled to, which isn't much. It was the first piece of truly good news I'd had in months. But Ben wasn't finished. Also, I heard back from Tyler's employer. He's been suspended pending an internal investigation. Looks like your evidence really shook things up. I couldn't help but smile. For the first time, I felt like I was regaining control of my life. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more move to make. A few days later, I arranged to meet Tyler. He had been avoiding me ever since I confronted Emily, but I knew he wouldn't ignore me forever. I called him from a burner phone and left a message. Meet me at Greenfield Park tomorrow at 3 p.m. We need to talk. If you don't show, I'll make sure everyone in this town knows exactly who you are. He showed up. Of course he did. People like Tyler always think they can talk their way out of anything. When he arrived, I was already waiting, sitting on a bench near the lake. He approached cautiously, his usual smug expression replaced by one of wariness. "Jake," he said, forcing a smile, "let's be reasonable about this." I stood, cutting him off. "Reasonable? Like you and Emily were reasonable when you plotted to ruin me." He held up his hands, palms out, in a mock gesture of surrender. "Look, I know things got out of hand, but this doesn't have to get ugly. We're both adults." "Stop," I snapped, my voice cold. "You don't get to stand here and lecture me about being an adult. You slept with my wife. You tried to steal my home, my money, and my dignity. And now, you're going to pay for it." Tyler's smirk returned, though it was weaker than before. "What are you going to do, Jake? Fight me? That won't solve anything." I took a step closer, keeping my voice low and controlled. "I don't need to fight you, Tyler. You've already lost. Your boss knows who you really are. Your reputation is in shambles. And soon, you'll be lucky if you can land a job flipping burgers." His face paled slightly, but he kept his composure. "You think this is over?" he said, his voice shaking just enough to betray his nerves. "You don't know who you're messing with." "No, Tyler," I said, turning to leave. "You don't know who you were messing with." Within days, Tyler was fired from his job. Emily, meanwhile, had moved in with a friend, desperately trying to salvage her life. She continued to call and text me, alternating between anger and begging, but I ignored every message. I was done with her, done with the lies, and done with the pain. For the first time in months, I felt free. The betrayal had broken me, but it hadn't destroyed me. I had fought back, protected what was mine, and ensured that neither Emily nor Tyler could ever take advantage of me again. The days following Tyler's professional demise and Emily's departure were strangely quiet. For months, I'd lived in a storm of deceit, anger, and heartbreak. Now, the calm felt almost alien, but I knew the silence wasn't just a void. It was an opportunity to start over. The first thing I did was take stock of everything I still had. Despite Emily's betrayal, I realized I wasn't completely broken. My career was intact, my father was still holding on, and my circle of loyal friends had rallied around me like never before. Most importantly, I had my dignity, something Emily and Tyler had tried and failed to strip away. I threw myself into cleaning out the house. Every trace of Emily and her lies had to go. Her clothes, her books, even the stupid decorative pillows she loved. All of it went into bags and boxes. Some I donated, some I trashed. It was cathartic, like I was purging the poison she'd left behind. The house felt lighter, like it could finally breathe again, and so could I. But it wasn't just the physical reminders of Emily that I needed to let go. Her betrayal had left scars on my confidence, my ability to trust, and even my sense of identity. For years, I'd thought of myself as Emily's husband, but now I had to figure out who I was without her. So, I started with the basics. I decided to revisit old hobbies I'd neglected during my marriage. I pulled out my dusty guitar from the attic, restrung it, and started playing again. Music had always been a passion of mine, but I put it on the back burner to focus on work and, ironically, to spend time with Emily. Now, it felt like I was rediscovering a part of myself I'd forgotten existed. I also started hitting the gym regularly. At first, it was just a way to burn off the lingering anger, but it quickly became something more. Every weight I lifted, every mile I ran, felt like a small victory. I wasn't just rebuilding my body, I was rebuilding my spirit. One of the most significant steps I took was reconnecting with my father. His illness had been the backdrop to this entire ordeal, and I realized I hadn't spent nearly enough time with him in the months since Emily's betrayal came to light. I began visiting him daily, sharing meals and stories, and soaking up every moment we had left. Those visits became the anchor I needed, reminding me of what truly mattered. Emily wasn't done trying to claw her way back into my life. Her texts became more erratic, some begging for forgiveness, others lashing out and accusing me of being cruel. One day, she showed up at the house unannounced, her face tear-streaked and full of desperation. "Jake, please," she said, standing on the porch like she expected me to invite her in. "We can fix this. I made a mistake, but we can work through it." I didn't let her inside. Instead, I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Emily, there's nothing to fix. You didn't just cheat, you tried to destroy me. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. She broke down, sobbing and pleading, but I didn't waver. Eventually, she left, her shoulders slumped in her car, kicking up gravel as she drove away. It was the last time I saw her in person. A few weeks later, I got an email from Tyler. The subject line simply read, "Let's talk." Against my better judgment, I opened it. In the email, Tyler claimed he wanted to clear the air. He apologized sort of for his actions but spent most of the message blaming Emily for dragging him into the mess. He painted himself as a victim, someone who had been manipulated by her. I didn't respond. Tyler's self-serving apology wasn't worth my time. He and Emily deserved each other, and I hoped they'd spend the rest of their lives dodging the fallout of their toxic choices. As the weeks turned into months, I began to feel like myself again, or maybe a new version of myself, stronger and more resilient. I started volunteering at a local hospice, inspired by my father's strength and the care he'd been receiving. Helping others gave me a sense of purpose and reminded me that even in the darkest times, there was still good in the world. I also started dating again, cautiously at first. Meeting new people felt strange, almost surreal, after everything I'd been through. But I told myself I deserved to be happy, to find someone who valued loyalty and honesty. It wasn't about replacing Emily, it was about moving forward. Looking back, Emily and Tyler's betrayal taught me some painful but valuable lessons. I learned to trust my instincts, to set boundaries, and to protect myself from people who don't have my best interests at heart. Most importantly, I learned that betrayal doesn't have to define you. It can shape you, make you stronger, and push you to find the life you truly deserve. As I sit here writing this, the sun is setting outside my new apartment, its warm glow filling the room. It's a reminder that endings can be beginnings, that even after the worst storms, the sky clears. I'm not the man I was when this all started, but maybe that's a good thing. Just when I thought I had everything under control, life threw me another curveball. A few weeks after the fallout, I received a letter in the mail. At first, I thought it was just another piece of paperwork related to the divorce, but as I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was a formal notice from Tyler. He was suing me for defamation. My first reaction was disbelief. After everything he had done, cheating with my wife, trying to ruin me financially, he had the audacity to play the victim? The letter claimed I had maliciously damaged his reputation by sharing private messages and emails with his employer and online. He was demanding damages for emotional distress and loss of income. I immediately called Ben. "Can you believe this?" I said, pacing my living room. "He's suing me? After everything he's done?" Ben's voice was calm, but firm. "Jake, don't worry. This is just a desperate move. He knows he's cornered and trying to claw back at you. We'll fight this." The idea of going back to court so soon after everything was exhausting, but I wasn't about to let Tyler intimidate me. Ben assured me that the case was weak. The evidence I had shared was factual, and Tyler had no grounds to claim defamation when the truth was on my side. Still, the lawsuit brought back a flood of emotions I thought I had buried. The betrayal, the anger, the humiliation, it all came rushing back. I couldn't help but wonder if this was part of some larger plan between him and Emily. Were they conspiring to take one last shot at me? The thought alone made my blood boil. Just as I was gearing up to fight Tyler in court, I got an unexpected knock on my door. When I opened it, I found Emily standing there, looking disheveled and desperate. "Jake, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "I think we've said everything we need to say, Emily." "Please," she said, her eyes welling up with tears. "It's about Tyler." That caught my attention. Against my better judgment, I let her in, but I made it clear this wasn't a reconciliation. She sat on the couch, wringing her hands as she explained. "Tyler's suing you because he's broke," she began. "After he lost his job, he tried to start his own business, but it flopped. He's been calling me nonstop, blaming me for everything." I raised an eyebrow. "And why should I care? Sounds like karma to me." She sighed, looking down at her hands. "I know I've messed up, more than you'll ever forgive me for. But Tyler, he's dangerous, Jake. He's not just coming after you to save face. He wants to destroy you. He's bitter and angry, and he's spiraling. For a moment, I studied her, trying to figure out if this was another manipulation. But there was something in her voice, fear, maybe, that made me think she was telling the truth. As much as I hated to admit it, Emily knew Tyler better than anyone. "What do you want me to do about it?" I finally asked. "I don't know," she said, shaking her head. "I just thought you should know. He's not going to play fair." Her words lingered long after she left. I didn't trust her, but I couldn't ignore the possibility that Tyler was more desperate than I realized. With Ben's help, I started building my defense against Tyler's lawsuit. We compiled evidence to show that everything I had shared was truthful and in the public interest. Ben also dug into Tyler's financial records, uncovering a history of shady dealings that we could use to discredit him. But the real turning point came when I decided to turn the tables. If Tyler wanted a legal battle, I was going to give him one he'd never forget. Ben helped me countersue for harassment and frivolous litigation, citing the emotional toll his actions had taken on me. The court date was set, and I braced myself for another round of legal warfare. This time, though, I wasn't just fighting to protect myself. I was fighting to end this once and for all. The day of the court hearing finally arrived, and I felt a strange mix of anxiety and determination as I stepped into the courthouse. Tyler was already there, sitting at the plaintiff's table with his lawyer, a slick-looking guy who oozed arrogance. Tyler gave me a smug smile as I walked past, but I ignored him. I wasn't here to trade glances. I was here to win. My lawyer, Ben, was confident. "We've got this," he whispered as we took our seats. "Their case is built on sand." The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and no patience for theatrics, began the proceedings. Tyler's lawyer started off with a dramatic opening statement, painting Tyler as a victim of a malicious smear campaign that had ruined his reputation and left him unemployable. He claimed I had acted out of jealousy and spite, and that my actions had caused Tyler irreparable harm. When it was our turn, Ben stood up, calm and composed. "Your Honor, the plaintiff's claims are baseless. The evidence my client shared was factual and in response to the plaintiff's own unethical actions, which include an affair with my client's wife and an attempt to defraud him of his assets. The truth is not defamatory." The room grew tense as Ben began presenting our case. He laid out every piece of evidence, emails, texts, financial records, proving not only that Tyler's actions were dishonest, but that his reputation had been tarnished by his own choices, not mine. The real fireworks began during Tyler's cross-examination. Ben questioned him about the affair, his attempts to manipulate Emily into draining our accounts, and his unethical behavior at work. Tyler squirmed under the pressure, his cocky demeanor cracking with every pointed question. "You claim that my client's actions caused you to lose your job," Ben said, pacing in front of the courtroom. "But isn't it true that your employer conducted its own investigation into your behavior and found you in violation of company policies?" Tyler stammered, glancing nervously at his lawyer. I don't recall the exact details." Ben didn't let up. "Let me refresh your memory." He handed the judge a document, an internal report from Tyler's former employer detailing his misconduct. "It seems your termination had nothing to do with my client and everything to do with your own actions." The courtroom was silent except for the sound of Tyler shifting uncomfortably in his seat. His lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. But the nail in the coffin came when Ben presented evidence of Tyler's financial troubles. Bank statements and failed business ventures painted a clear picture. Tyler was suing me out of desperation, hoping to dig himself out of a hole he'd dug for himself. When it was my turn to testify, I kept my composure, recounting the betrayal and the steps I'd taken to protect myself. I didn't embellish or dramatize. I just told the truth. The judge nodded thoughtfully, her expression neutral but attentive. By the time closing arguments rolled around, it was clear which way the case was leaning. Tyler's lawyer tried to spin the narrative one last time, but the damage was done. Ben's closing argument was succinct and powerful. "The plaintiff has brought this case not for justice, but for revenge. He has no one to blame but himself for the position he's in today." After a brief recess, the judge returned with her decision. She dismissed Tyler's case, citing a lack of evidence and noting that his own actions had caused his downfall. But that wasn't all. She also ruled in favor of my countersuit, ordering Tyler to pay damages for harassment and frivolous litigation. Tyler's face was a mix of anger and humiliation as the judge delivered her ruling. I didn't gloat or celebrate. I just felt relief. This chapter of my life was finally coming to a close. As I walked out of the courthouse, the weight I'd been carrying for months began to lift. Ben clapped me on the shoulder. "You handled it like a pro, Jake." "Thanks," I said, smiling for the first time in what felt like ages. "I couldn't have done it without you." Tyler's attempts to ruin me had backfired spectacularly, and Emily's betrayal was firmly in the rearview mirror. It wasn't the ending I'd envisioned for my life, but it was a new beginning, and for the first time, I felt ready to embrace it. With the courtroom drama finally behind me, I felt like I could breathe again. The whirlwind of betrayal, legal battles, and emotional turmoil was over. Now it was time to focus on me, something I hadn't done in years. The first thing I did was make some changes around the house. The place had become a constant reminder of Emily, of the life we'd built together and how she'd torn it apart. I sold most of the furniture we'd picked out as a couple and replaced it with things that reflected who I was now. The walls were repainted, the living room got a new couch, and I even turned the spare bedroom into a home office. The transformation felt symbolic, like I was reclaiming my space and my life. One night, while cleaning out the attic, I stumbled upon an old guitar I hadn't touched in years. Back in college, music had been my escape, my way of expressing emotions I couldn't put into words. Life had gotten in the way, and I'd let it gather dust. But that night, I picked it up, tuned it, and started playing. It felt like reconnecting with an old friend. The melodies came back slowly at first, but soon I was strumming like I hadn't skipped a beat. Playing music became my therapy, a way to channel all the anger, hurt, and confusion I'd been carrying. I even started writing songs again, something I hadn't done since my 20s. The more I played, the more I realized how much I'd missed it. Music wasn't just a hobby. It was a piece of myself I'd buried, and now it was helping me heal. During the chaos, I kept to myself, isolating from friends and family. But now I started reaching out. My best friend, Mike, was the first to notice the change. "Man, it's good to see you smiling again," he said over beers one night. For a while there, I was worried I'd lost my wingman. We laughed, something I hadn't done in months. Hanging out with Mike and the rest of my friends reminded me that I wasn't alone. They'd been there for me all along. I just hadn't let them in. One afternoon, while grabbing coffee in my favorite cafe, I ran into someone unexpected. Claire, an old friend from high school. We hadn't seen each other in years, but she looked just as I remembered. Kind eyes, an easy smile, and an energy that instantly put me at ease. "Jake," she said, her face lighting up with recognition. "Wow, it's been forever." We spent the next hour catching up, talking about everything from work to life to the craziness of the past few years. I didn't tell her about Emily. Not yet, but something about our conversation felt refreshing, like a reminder that good things could still happen. Before she left, Claire gave me her number and told me to call her if I ever wanted to hang out. I didn't know if I was ready for anything serious, but the idea of reconnecting with an old friend felt nice. As the weeks turned into months, I started feeling like myself again. The scars from Emily's betrayal were still there, but they didn't define me anymore. I was rediscovering who I was, who I wanted to be. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be perfect. Healing isn't linear, and there would still be tough days. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Life didn't end with Emily and Tyler. It was just beginning. Life was finally starting to feel normal again, or at least a new kind of normal. The weight of Emily's betrayal no longer loomed over me like a dark cloud. I had reclaimed my space, reconnected with my passions, and begun to heal. But I knew there was still more work to do. One of the biggest lessons I'd learned was the importance of setting boundaries, not just with others, but with myself. I was done with toxic relationships, with letting people take advantage of me, and with losing myself in the chaos of someone else's life. It was time to start living intentionally. After running into Claire at the cafe, I couldn't stop thinking about her. It wasn't just the nostalgia. There was something comforting about the way she'd listened without judgment, the way she'd smiled like she saw me, and not just the mess I'd been through. I decided to text her. Nothing fancy, just a casual, "Hey, it was great seeing you. Want to grab coffee again sometime?" Her reply came within minutes. "I'd love to. How about Saturday?" That Saturday turned into hours of conversation, laughter, and a connection that felt easy and genuine. Claire wasn't just a distraction. She was someone who reminded me what it felt like to trust again. We started meeting regularly, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for hikes, and eventually, I told her everything about Emily and Tyler. Her reaction wasn't what I expected. She didn't pity me or act shocked. She just listened, her eyes full of understanding. "That's a lot to go through," she said softly. "But it sounds like you've handled it better than most people would." For the first time, I felt like someone saw my scars and didn't see them as flaws. Claire became my anchor, a reminder that not everyone in my life would betray me. I also threw myself into new activities to fill the void left by the upheaval. I joined a local community band, which gave me a chance to share my love of music with others. It felt good to be part of something bigger than myself, to create something meaningful alongside people who shared my passion. Work was another area where I found stability. I started taking on leadership roles at my job, focusing on projects that challenged me and gave me a sense of accomplishment. My colleagues noticed the change, often commenting on how much more confident and driven I seemed. It wasn't just about proving something to them. It was about proving it to myself. One evening, out of the blue, I got a text from Emily. It was short, just a few lines. "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to say this. I'm sorry for everything I did to you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you find happiness." For a moment, I just stared at the message, unsure how to feel. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let her words drift into the void like she had. But another part of me, the part that had worked so hard to heal, wanted closure. I replied simply, "I appreciate the apology. I've moved on, and I hope you do too." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was peace. I wasn't holding on to the anger anymore. Emily had made her choices, and I had made mine. We were done, and that was enough. With Claire, things started to evolve naturally. What began as a friendship turned into something deeper, something I hadn't expected but welcomed with open arms. She wasn't just someone who listened. She was someone who challenged me, who made me laugh, who reminded me that life could be good again. One evening, as we sat on my newly redecorated couch, she looked at me and said, "You know, you're stronger than you think. Most people wouldn't come out of what you've been through with this much grace." Her words stayed with me. For so long, I'd felt broken, like the pieces of my life would never fit back together. But now, sitting beside Claire, I realized I wasn't just healing, I was thriving. As the seasons changed, so did I. The house that once felt like a battlefield now felt like a home. The man who once felt lost now felt found. Life had thrown its worst at me, but I'd come out the other side stronger, wiser, and more determined to live fully. Months had passed since the whirlwind of betrayal and legal battles, and I'd reached a place I never thought I'd find again: peace. The scars of my past were still there, faint reminders of what I'd endured, but they no longer defined me. I was finally ready to close the chapter on Emily, Tyler, and everything they represented. One thing lingered, though, a box of memories buried deep in the closet. It held photos, mementos, and keepsakes from my marriage with Emily. For months, I hadn't been able to bring myself to open it. But now, it was time to confront the last remnants of my old life. That Saturday morning, I pulled the box out and sat on the living room floor. Inside were pictures of Emily and me from happier times. Our wedding day, vacations, and birthdays. There was a program from our honeymoon trip to the Grand Canyon, handwritten anniversary cards, and even an old playlist we'd made together. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness. Not for what we'd lost, but for what it could have been. But as I sorted through the memories, I realized something important. Not everything in that box was tainted. There had been love once, even if it ended in betrayal. And acknowledging that helped me let go of the bitterness I'd carried for so long. I took the items I wanted to keep, just a few, and placed them in a smaller box. The rest I packed away to donate or discard. It felt symbolic, like I was decluttering my soul as much as my home. After closing the box, I decided it was time for something new. Claire had been encouraging me to take a trip, to step out of my comfort zone and explore the world beyond the small bubble I'd built. So, I booked a solo trip to the Pacific Northwest, a place I'd always wanted to visit but never had the time. The trip was everything I needed. Serene hikes through moss-covered forests, the crash of waves against rocky cliffs, and the solitude to reflect on how far I'd come. Standing on the edge of a windswept bluff, looking out at the endless ocean, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in years. I realized something profound during that trip. My life wasn't defined by what had happened to me. It was defined by how I chose to move forward. When I returned home, my phone buzzed with an unexpected message from Emily's sister, Lauren. We hadn't spoken since the fallout, but she wanted to meet for coffee. "There's something I need to tell you," she wrote. Curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet her. Over lattes in a quiet cafe, Lauren explained that Emily had moved out of state and was trying to start over. "She's not in a great place," Lauren said, her tone soft but honest. "She knows she messed up, Jake. She talks about it all the time, how she wishes she'd done things differently." I nodded, unsure how to respond. I wasn't looking for an apology or an explanation anymore, but hearing that Emily was struggling didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it might. Instead, it just confirmed what I already knew. The best revenge wasn't watching her fall. It was rising above it. Lauren reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You seem different. Happier." "I am," I said simply. And for the first time, I meant it. With my past finally behind me, I felt ready to embrace the future. And that included Claire. Our connection had grown stronger with each passing day, and I knew it was time to take things to the next level. One evening, as we walked along the waterfront, I turned to her and said, "I'm not sure what the future holds, but I want you to be part of it." She smiled, her eyes sparkling in the twilight. "I feel the same way." It wasn't a grand, dramatic moment. It didn't need to be. It was quiet, real, and exactly what I needed. In the weeks that followed, Claire and I began blending our lives in small but meaningful ways. She introduced me to her family, and I introduced her to my favorite hiking trails. We didn't rush anything, letting the relationship grow naturally, free from the weight of expectations. As for me, I continued to focus on rebuilding. I started mentoring a young colleague at work, sharing the lessons I'd learned about resilience and perseverance. I played music at open mic nights, something I'd never had the courage to do before. And most importantly, I started living for myself, not for someone else's approval or expectations. One evening, I stood on my back porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was crisp, and the sounds of life carried on around me. Children laughing, dogs barking, the faint hum of traffic in the distance. For the first time, those sounds didn't feel like noise. They felt like life. I thought about everything I'd been through, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger, and realized it had all led me here. I wasn't the same person I'd been before Emily and Tyler turned my world upside down. I was stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. One day, I came across an old photo album while organizing my attic. It was filled with pictures of Emily and me during happier times, vacations, holidays, the small moments that had once felt so significant. For a brief second, a wave of sadness hit me. But instead of closing the album and shoving it back into a box, I decided to face it. I sat there on the attic floor, flipping through the pages, letting myself feel every emotion that came up. Anger, grief, nostalgia. But as I reached the last page, something unexpected happened. Instead of focusing on the betrayal, I saw those memories for what they were, pieces of my life that shaped who I'd become. The love I'd once had for Emily wasn't something to erase or regret. It was a chapter, a flawed, painful, but ultimately transformative part of my story. And now it was over. Without hesitation, I closed the album and placed it in a donation box. I didn't need it anymore. My relationship with Claire was blossoming into something I hadn't dared to hope for. Real, genuine love. But this time it felt different. It wasn't rushed or clouded by illusions. It was built on trust, honesty, and the shared understanding of life's imperfections. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the stars, she turned to me with a question that caught me off guard. "Do you think you'll ever get married again?" For a moment, I didn't know how to answer. Marriage had once symbolized stability and forever to me, but now it carried the weight of everything I'd lost. Yet, as I looked at Claire, I realized my hesitation wasn't about her. It was about fear. "I don't know," I admitted, "but if I ever did, it would be with someone I can trust completely. Someone like you." She smiled, her hand finding mine. That's all I needed to hear. The final piece of my healing came from sharing my story, not just with Claire or my close friends, but with others who might be going through something similar. I started volunteering at a local support group for people navigating the aftermath of infidelity. At first, it felt strange to stand in front of a room of strangers and recount the worst chapter of my life. But as I spoke, I saw the impact my words had on others. They weren't just hearing my story, they were seeing a path forward. Helping others heal gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. It reminded me that pain, no matter how deep, could be transformed into something meaningful. As I stood on the edge of a new year, I felt ready to turn the page completely. The house was finally sold, and Claire and I were planning a cross-country road trip to visit places we'd always dreamed of seeing. It wasn't just a vacation. It was a symbol of the life I was building, free of the weight of betrayal. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a man defined by what I'd lost. I felt like someone who had gained strength, clarity, and the courage to start over. Life had tested me, broken me, and reshaped me. But now I was whole again and ready for whatever came next. The real turning point came unexpectedly. I was out for a morning run, the crisp air filling my lungs when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Emily. "I've sold the condo and am moving out of state. Just wanted to let you know. Take care, Jake." I stared at the message for a long time. It was simple, almost anticlimactic, but it hit me in a way I hadn't expected. She was leaving for good. No more chances for accidental run-ins or leftover drama. This was truly the end. Instead of responding, I slid my phone back into my pocket and kept running. The world didn't stop turning, and neither did I. The message felt like a book closing, a final chapter written. That evening, I sat on my back porch, sipping a beer and watching the sun dip below the horizon. I thought about everything: the betrayal, the anger, the heartbreak, and the growth. For the first time, I felt nothing but peace. Emily and Tyler had taken enough of my energy, enough of my life. It was over. Claire had become a steady presence in my life by then. What started as casual coffee meetups had blossomed into something deeper, something meaningful. She never pushed for answers about my past, but she was always there when I needed to talk. One night, we were sitting together on my porch, the same spot where I'd made peace with the end of my old life. She glanced over at me, her expression soft but curious. "You seem lighter," she said, her voice gentle. I smiled. I think I finally let it all go. She reached for my hand, and I didn't hesitate to take hers. "You deserve to be happy," she said simply. For the first time, I believed her. Letting go of the past wasn't about forgetting. It was about acknowledging the pain, learning from it, and choosing to move forward. My life wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but it was mine again. I had a new love, a renewed sense of purpose, and a future I was excited to face. Emily and Tyler were nothing more than a footnote in the story of my life, a cautionary tale that had shaped me, but didn't define me. As the stars came out that night, I made a promise to myself. I would live fully, love deeply, and never let betrayal or bitterness steal my joy again. This wasn't the ending. It was the beginning of something better. The days turned into weeks, and life began to take on a new rhythm. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely excited about what lay ahead. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving. One of the biggest shifts was how I approached relationships. Claire and I had grown closer, but we were taking things slow. Neither of us was in a rush, and that made all the difference. Every moment with her felt easy, natural, and unforced. One evening, as we walked through the park together, she paused and turned to me. "Jake," she said, her eyes serious but warm, "I know we've both been through a lot, but I feel like we've built something real here. Do you?" Her vulnerability caught me off guard, but I didn't hesitate. "I do," I said, squeezing her hand, more than I thought I ever could again. It was the truth. Claire wasn't just someone I cared about. She was someone who reminded me that love could be safe, steady, and joyful. Work had also taken an unexpected turn. My renewed focus and determination hadn't gone unnoticed, and my boss offered me a chance to lead a major project, one that would require me to step out of my comfort zone and travel more often. At first, I hesitated. The idea of leaving my newly rebuilt life, even temporarily, felt daunting. But Claire encouraged me. "This is your chance to do something big," she said. "You've worked so hard to get here. Don't let fear hold you back." Her words stayed with me. She was right. This was an opportunity to prove to myself that I could take risks again, that I could trust myself to handle whatever came my way. So, I said yes. The project took me to new cities and introduced me to new people, but it also gave me time to reflect. On long flights and quiet nights in hotel rooms, I thought about how far I'd come, from the man who had been blindsided by betrayal to someone who had rebuilt his life brick by brick. Claire and I stayed connected during my travels, talking late into the night and sending each other pictures and updates. Distance didn't weaken our bond, it strengthened it. When the project wrapped up months later, I returned home feeling like a new man. Claire was waiting for me at the airport, her smile brighter than any welcome home banner. As we hugged, I realized something I hadn't said out loud yet. "I love you," I whispered, the words coming easily and without hesitation. She pulled back, her eyes wide with surprise but filled with happiness. "I love you too." It wasn't a grand moment. It was simple, quiet, and perfect. With the project behind me and a new sense of purpose guiding me, I began to think about the future in a way I hadn't dared to before. Claire and I started making plans, small ones at first like weekend trips and shared hobbies, but eventually bigger ones. One night, as we sat together on the porch that had become our favorite spot, I turned to her and said, "What do you think about moving in together?" Her smile was all the answer I needed. Life wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But it was beautiful in its imperfection. I had faced the worst and come out stronger, and now I was ready to embrace whatever came next with Claire by my side. This was the new beginning I had been waiting for, and I wasn't looking back.